Your tomato plant is already dead, you just haven't admitted it yet. It is sitting in that raised bed you built last spring, the one that cost you $220 in lumber and bagged soil from the store. And right now its leaves are curling inward like fists. You've been watering it every morning, you've been feeding it whatever the bottle at the garden center told you to feed it, and still it is dying, slowly, expensively, on your watch. That failure is not about your thumbs or your schedule. In my field logs, I have documented this exact phenomenon hundreds of times. That failure was engineered into the system before you ever pushed a seed into the dirt. Step back from the wilting plant for a second and look at the bigger picture. Grocery store shelves that used to hold $3.3 heads of lettuce now want $6.6. A single red bell pepper rings up at $4.4 in most American cities, and that price has nowhere to go but higher. Because every link in the chain that delivers it, diesel fuel, synthetic fertilizer, refrigerated trucking, municipal water pumped from aquifers draining faster than they refill, every single link is getting more expensive and more fragile. At the same time, one freak frost in northern Mexico, one ruptured pipeline in the Central Valley, and the produce aisle turns into a suggestion. So you tried to opt out, you did the responsible thing. You watched the YouTube videos, bought the raised bed kit hauled in the potting mix, ran a drip line off your outdoor spigot, and planted, and the soil turned to concrete by August. The zucchini got powdery mildew. Here is the part nobody selling you seeds and soil wants to say out loud. The water is not missing, you are standing in it right now, on a dry summer afternoon, at 30 degrees Celsius and 50% relative humidity conditions so ordinary you would call them boring. Every single cubic meter of air above your yard holds just over 15 grams of water vapor. That is a fact. You can pull straight from a standard psychrometric chart, the same reference table that HVAC engineers use to design cooling systems. The system you inherited, hose, spigot, drip emitter, monthly utility bill, was never built to cooperate with the atmosphere. It was built to sell you access to water somebody else controls, and the moment that access gets rationed or priced beyond reach, or simply shut off during a drought mandate, your food supply collapses right alongside it. That is not a gardening problem, that is a dependency trap, and every wilted leaf in your backyard is proof you are sitting inside it. The real question is not how to water more efficiently. Here is the part that should make you furious. Every bag of synthetic fertilizer you have ever hauled from the garden center, every jug of weed killer you sprayed along your beds, every $44 sack labeled premium nutrient-rich planting mix, none of it was designed to grow your food. It was designed to make you buy it again next season. That is the business model, not fertility. Through my analysis of subterranean networks, I've seen what is actually happening 6 inches below your raised bed right now. In undisturbed ground, there is a fungal network so dense that a single teaspoon of healthy forest soil contains over 100 meters of hyphal threads. Those threads operate like a living irrigation grid. They pull moisture from deep pockets you could never reach with a watering can, negotiate mineral trades between plant roots, and this matters, they physically bind soil particles into stable aggregates that hold water the way a sponge does. That network took decades to build itself. One pass with a rototiller shreds it into dead organic matter in about 90 seconds. This is not a fringe claim. Soil scientists at the University of California documented that conventionally fertilized agricultural plots showed a 40 to 60% reduction in mycorrhizal colonization compared to untreated controls. 40 to 60% of the living infrastructure gone, replaced by a chemical drip feed you have to pay for every single spring. Meanwhile, 2,000 years ago, farmers in the Negev desert were growing food in landscapes that receive fewer than 90 millimeters of annual rainfall, and they never bought a single input. They stacked coarse local stone into calculated mounds that exploited a basic thermodynamic fact: rock cools faster than air after sundown, and when its surface temperature drops below the dew point, water vapor physically condenses on it, so the water was never missing. The mechanism to capture it was, and the modern agricultural supply chain made sure you never learned that, because a pile of free rocks does not generate quarterly revenue. Every dollar you spent on irrigation timers, moisture-retaining gel crystals, and bagged garden soil was a dollar paid to bypass a problem that physics had already solved for free. Picture a slab of rough basalt the size of a dinner plate sitting directly over the roots of your tomato plant. All afternoon, that stone has been quietly drinking heat, not reflecting it, not wasting it, absorbing it deep into its mineral grain, the way a cast iron skillet holds a flame long after the burner clicks off. Basalt, granite, unpolished limestone. These are not garden decorations. They are thermal batteries with a volumetric heat capacity high enough to soak up hours of solar radiation and lock it inside their crystalline structure. Now watch what happens after sunset. The sky opens up like a cold vacuum. That dense stone, fully exposed to the night atmosphere, begins dumping its stored energy as infrared radiation straight into open space. Its surface temperature drops fast, not just to match the cooling air, but below it, sometimes dramatically below it, until it crosses a specific threshold that most gardeners have never heard of. No fertilizer bag has ever printed the atmospheric dew point. This is where the Clausius-Clapeyron relation takes over, and it is as predictable as gravity. When warm, humid night air drifts across that chilled rock face, the air physically cannot hold its water vapor anymore. The kinetic energy of those airborne water molecules crashes. They slow, they cluster, they condense into fat liquid droplets directly on the mineral surface. In my research into lithic mulching, I've observed that this is where the biology kicks in, and this is the part the agricultural industry would prefer. Stayed buried, those droplets do not just sit on the stone. They creep downward, slow and steady, into the top 3.3 inches of soil beneath that rock, a zone that is now insulated from morning sun, shielded from wind, and held at a nearly constant moisture level around the clock. That thin, damp layer becomes a biological incubator. Mycorrhizal fungi, the thread-like networks that function as a living root extension for your plants, need exactly this kind of environment: consistent, low-level moisture, stable temperature, no UV exposure. When those conditions hold, the fungi push their hyphae outward through the soil matrix, physically connecting to your plant's feeder roots, delivering phosphorus, nitrogen, and micronutrients that the roots alone could never reach. Aerobic bacteria join the operation, breaking down raw organic matter into forms your crops can actually absorb. None of this requires a single input you have to purchase. The stone pulls water from air. The water feeds the fungi, and the mechanism is not fragile. It is not theoretical. It repeats every single night that humidity exists in your atmosphere, which in most temperate climates means nearly every night of the growing season. You are not installing a gadget, you are restoring a passive atmospheric condenser coupled to a subterranean biological engine. One simple, observable sequence that ancient growers understood well enough to keep crops alive for 2,000 years without a single drop of irrigation. So when you decide to build this in your own yard, leave the polished river stones on the nursery shelf. Smooth, decorative rock is engineered for a pathway, not a thermal battery. What you need is raw, heavy, high-density field stone, the rough, ugly basalt or granite you can haul from a bulk landscaping yard for pennies a pound, or pull straight from a cleared pasture where it has been sitting useless for decades. Here is the part that breaks most people's brains. You do not add anything to this system, you subtract. You stop watering, you stop amending. You stop fighting the dry spell with a hose bill that climbs $11 higher every July. Instead, you walk out to the edge of your property, find the ugliest pile of dense fieldstone nobody wants, load a wheelbarrow, and let physics do what physics has been doing since before Rome had plumbing. Picture the moment: late afternoon, sun hammering down at full intensity. A chunk of solid basalt the size a cantaloupe, 5.5 to 8.8 pounds of raw mineral density, is quietly drinking that radiation into its crystalline structure. It does not heat the soil beneath it. It cannot, because you carved a shallow saucer into the earth first, just 2.2 or 3.3 inches deep, sloping gently inward toward the stem of your tomato or pepper or whatever you are trying to keep alive. That basin is the catchment. The stone is the engine, and the fuel is already floating around your head in An invisible ocean you have been ignoring your entire gardening life. When the sun drops and the night sky opens up, that stone surrenders. Its heat fast, surface temperature plummets below the dew point, and moisture that was riding the air all day long has no choice but to condense on that cold, rough surface. Gravity does the rest. Every droplet crawls down the base of the rock, follows the slope you carved, and pools exactly where the feeder roots are waiting. You did not pump it, you did not pay for it, you did not even turn a valve, you just placed a rock in the right spot and walked away. But placement is everything, and this is where most people would wreck the whole mechanism by rushing. You do not shove stones against the bark. That 2.2-inch gap between the inner edge of your ring and the plant stem is not optional, it is the difference between a functioning condensation trap and an invitation for fungal rot to eat your crop from the collar down. Stones go shoulder to shoulder, interlocking tight, forming a continuous thermal shield over that depressed basin, then a second ring outside the first, staggered so the joints never line up, eliminating any gap wide enough for midday sun to punch through and bake the moisture out of your catchment before nightfall even arrives. Think about what just happened. You moved some rocks, you scraped a shallow dish in the dirt with a hand trowel, you loosened the hard pan at the bottom so condensation could percolate past the wind line before morning. Total cost, zero. Total imported technology, zero. Total ongoing maintenance, you occasionally glance at it while drinking coffee. And yet, this arrangement, this geometry that looks like a lazy person's excuse for landscaping, is running a thermodynamic cycle that extracts water from thin air every single night without your permission or participation. I have found that the system does not need you to show up, it needs you to stop showing up with a hose and a bag of synthetic amendments and just let the temperature differential do its ancient reliable work. Someone watching this right now is thinking, sure, that handles one plant, maybe two, but what about scaling this across 33 square feet of raised beds and a full row of brassicas? And that is the exact question that reveals how deeply the input-dependent mindset has buried itself into the way we think about growing food. Because the answer is not more infrastructure, it is more rocks, the same rocks that are sitting in a pile at the edge of every cleared pasture, every rural county in the country, free for the hauling, dense enough to hold heat, ugly enough that nobody else wants them. You are not building a complicated irrigation grid, you are replicating a single elegant pattern, one basin, one ring, one gap across every plant that matters to you. The labor is front-loaded into a single afternoon. After that, the atmosphere pays your water bill every night while you sleep. This is what less effort, more output actually looks like when it is not a productivity guru selling you a course. It is a physical law measurable on a psychrometric chart, repeatable in any climate where nighttime temperatures drop below the dew point, which is nearly everywhere humans grow food. In my clinical observations, the real question is not whether this works. 2,000 years of archaeological evidence already settled that. The real question is what else in your backyard is already trying to function on its own, and what would happen if you stopped interrupting it long enough to find out. So picture the scene that is already unfolding in neighborhoods across this country. A supply chain hiccup hits, drought order drops, a fuel shortage strangles the last mile delivery trucks. Your neighbor stands in a stripped grocery aisle, staring at a $44 head of wilted lettuce, palms sweating, mentally calculating how many meals are left in the freezer. He has done everything right by modern standards. He paid his water bill, he bought the automated drip system, he kept the subscription to the meal kit service, and none of it matters now, because every single link in his food chain runs through someone else's infrastructure. Now walk through your own back gate. Those fieldstones you placed months ago are still doing exactly what thermodynamics promised they would do. Condensation is still crawling down their convex faces in the dark hours, still threading through the crevices, still feeding root zones you have not touched with a hose since the day you set them. The kale is thick, the squash is sprawling, the soil beneath those rocks is cool and dark and alive with moisture that no municipal valve had to deliver. You did not spend a single dollar this morning to keep that food growing. You spent physics, you spent gravity, you spent the specific heat capacity of stone and the dew point of your own atmosphere, resources that no corporation can meter and no government can ration. This is the distinction most people refuse to see until it is too late. A garden connected to the grid is not food security, it is a hobby with an umbilical cord. The moment that cord gets cut, whether by drought, by price inflation, by rolling blackouts, by a busted water main, the hobby dies and the panic begins. But a system built on mass, on thermal differential, on the ancient contract between stone and air, that system does not care what happens to the grid. It operated before the grid existed. It will operate long after the grid fails. And that is what changes when you stop thinking of yourself as a gardener and start thinking of yourself as someone who has reclaimed a basic human birthright, growing food without permission, growing food without a monthly invoice, growing food that does not depend on a truck arriving on time or a pump station staying online. Every stone you set in that basin is a quiet act of secession from a supply chain that was never designed to keep you fed. I am currently tracking the expansion of these autonomous lithic systems. If the water stopped flowing to your house tomorrow, how many days could you actually feed yourself from what is growing in your own ground right now? Drop that number in the comments, even if it is 0, because that honest answer is the first real step toward never being caught empty-handed again.